Alrighty, this is part 3 of the Communist Manifesto that the majority of the people who believe they're, promoting or standing under common law use as their way to try and win their freedom. I know it's a big statement, but to actually understand that, you need to go back and watch the previous 2 videos because a lot of background's been given to that. So I'm just bringing it up from that point onwards. So if you've missed the previous 2, you're not going to understand what I just said. So you have 2 books here. This is what Tim Dwyer puts together. He's very passionate. It seems really like he knows his stuff because he speaks with conviction. Now here in the running list of others, the proponents, I think I mentioned their names in the previous one, they do exactly the same thing without realizing they're actually making the trap worse for all of us. Now, go back to what I said earlier. You get presented with 2 books. How do you know the system, the criminal structure, hasn't deliberately set this up to make you run to one direction because they've made the other one very obvious that it was going to be a fraud. So think about that, guys. Could they possibly set that up on purpose? Because if you go, aha, I've discovered the fraud, that means this one has to be the correct one, right? Well, they've given you 2 false ones. But you just don't understand the principle behind how to discover the first one that you saw was the original, and that they now set about creating this whole secret society fraud thing that happened in 1973, 86, whichever number you want to pick, just by a few bad apples. So then you will never go back and look at the original structure, how it was created on purpose. So this could actually happen, because through all of that, the people were always being controlled. Always. It was never any different. Because if we weren't being controlled, we'd never be going off to any wars. There's your first example. We wouldn't be creating famine for ourselves, right? Or sort of financial hardship. If we actually had control of our lives, it just wouldn't happen. No one would inflict that on themselves. So, it's about really being able to see through physical evidence, lived experience, and judging it against moral principle of how, if you had real control over your life, would you ever steer yourself in that direction? And this is what people don't look at. They fall for the mental construct, and that's what the whole legal legislation, all of that is designed to do, is to create a false reality in your mind, and then that's where you take your truth from. So that's the purpose of what we're doing here today. So we're going to move on to the wheel again, talking about individualism and collectivism, because you need to understand these fundamental principles to understand how you've been sucked in.
So, conscience. Now this is interesting because we have a conscience at the individual level. It's all about the individual. Okay, we have our moral rudder is built into us individually, and we're able to exercise that. Okay, I know it's kind of slightly coming out of the subject, but it's related, because we're seeing the fact that we have these abilities, these divine abilities built into us. Now the conscience is interesting, because we all have it, and we don't learn it as adults. We have a conscience even when we're very young children as well. Okay, and you see that, don't you, in children's behaviour, when one child takes a toy away from another child, and there's the complete misery and hurt. Yeah, you can see it in the sort of the reaction of the young child, that there's something wrong about what has happened. They've been absolutely damaged, in that moment. Yeah? And that conscience is in there, it's built in. It's something divine and natural within all of us. Okay, now what's interesting though about that, you can see where I'm going with this, is that conscience functions the same in all of us. We have it individually, but it functions the same. We all know when something is wrong. We can recognize right behaviour and wrong behaviour when we see it. And in fact, we recognise it in ourselves. And that's the uncomfortable feeling, isn't it? When we haven't done something right that we should have done, or whatever it is. Yeah, that's the pricking sensation that, So that's what the conscience is. Now that means that there must be some kind of absolute morality in the universe. It's built in.
Sorry, you're not allowed for narcissists, sorry.
Should we do that at the end? Do you want to ask me questions at the end, just so that I can keep the flow going? That'd be great. So the morality is, there must be some kind of absolute morality in the universe, because there's a set of standards. that we all seem to have consistently. We recognise it.
All right, so really important point he brings up is that the individual conscience is no more superior than anyone else's. So if that's the case, how can now a set of rules be written by a bunch of individuals who now come together, who believe themselves to be a ruling class, that are supposed to be our servants, and that's meant to be a legitimate system? Really important questions of principle to answer. Right? So if you cannot answer that, you're going to be in a bit of trouble as to how you can say that this is a legitimate constitution. Now, I haven't even gone into the history of all the other things that are surrounded by this. I'm just going on fundamental principle here and just focused on that before I even talk about the whole legitimacy of the monarch that supposedly granted assent to it and all that kind of stuff. And the Bill of Rights and how that, was already a fraud before that. I'm not even going into that. I'm just going to specifics of what's here as we are right now. So now Will's going to talk more about this, and he's going to mention the word anarchy. So if you hear that word anarchy and find it a trigger, just going to ask you, if you're seriously about learning, just hang on, because he will explain it, and then I'll give it even more exploration.
Okay. Now, what we're actually aiming for is the sovereign being a self-master. Now, what that is anarchy. Because what we really want is, because we have that conscience built into us, that means that we can deal with it ourselves. We don't need an external suggestion of what is right and what is wrong. Assuming that our sense of right behaviour and wrong behaviour is absolutely key within us, and we've finally attuned that consciousness. Okay, I'm not suggesting that the current state of affairs in our society is okay on that. Okay, we've got a deeply messed up consciousness in society, I would argue. Okay, so things are not right, certainly. But that's what you're aiming for, is that sovereign being as a self-master. And that's what we mean by, in a sense, in that context, as anarchy. There are different etymologies of the word anarchy, which I won't go into at the moment, but one of those is no external rulers, without external rulers, because we can do this for ourselves. We have responsibility, yeah?
So there you have it, right? That's pretty much all anarchy is the capacity to decide for yourself and take responsibility for those decisions. Nothing terrifying. And what they did is they took that word and they changed it by one letter, which I'm going to show you in a second. Here we go. So anarchy, as you can see, Greek prefix "an" means without or the absence of, archos, archon, ruler or master. So what they did is they chucked, instead of, it means no rulers, right? So absence of rulers. What they did is took off the R and said it's absence of rules. That's how easily they just switched it. And so now you believe it's a society that doesn't have any standards, and they just do whatever they like, and it's kill or be killed, and every man for himself. That's what you actually believe anarchy means, and that's what they do. They always invert the truth. They want to dissuade you, and this is the criminal class, the ones who run the show behind the scenes, and they're very adept at mental manipulation, because they know that's the first law of principles. They've got 7 natural law principles. That's the top one. Your reality comes through how you experience it through your mind. And so that's why they have to do it there. And so a bit more depth to that. Absence of a sole ruler, absence of ownership and control of others. That's what anarchy means. Is that not what we all seek? Otherwise we'd never say it's not fair. No conditions for masters and slaves to exist, hence the absence of slaves. The natural order of living in one's natural state of existence under natural law, with one's rights preserved and exercised without restraint. Really important to understand that. So we're going to go back into more of Will.
And we're also dealing with, this is of course bringing in the subject of equity and inequity. Okay, so this is basically to do with the fact that we are all equal in our community. It doesn't matter what level you're at, we are all to be treated equally under the law.
That's very important, really, really critical. It's how there is no favoritism, there is no discrimination. It's the same standard for everyone, regardless of your title, stature, no difference, right? So if that's the case, how do these people who take up a position of being in Parliament get away with that? They have to create a mind construct, and that was that fake constitution, right? And then they got everyone to vote for it. So then they're like, well, that's what we agreed to, without the people understanding how they're being deceived. And that's what most people who think they're using common law are actually giving their energy to. So they complain about this communist takeover while they use a communist manifesto. Could you imagine how much they must be laughing at you right now?
That is equity in the plain English sense. I'm not talking about the kind of law called equity.
So now he's talking about equity law, which is another mind construct that's made to look like it's about fairness. But like, if you understand anything about reality, you cannot bring laws into reality by writing them down. But you can create a mind construct, should I say, that has you believing that you can. Big difference. And that's what equity law is. That's another form of codified law. And that's a big mind trick.
Which is sometimes a bit of a distraction. Okay, what I'm talking about here is just the plain English sense of equity as opposed to inequity. Now,
all right, we're going to move on. So this is all about individualism and collectivism. Individualism is all about equality under the law, and equity. We all get the requirements we need to live the same quality of life as our neighbour. So that might mean different supports. That's essentially what equity is.
Okay, so think of all the things that are to do with individualism on the left-hand side and all the things to do with collectivism on the right-hand side.
Now, before we go on, I just wanted to add something to that, is that if you really want to see your neighbour flourish, and that's what Will said in the early stages of the videos I put together, he talks about, that we understand that our well-being is based on our neighbour's well-being. So we, as an individual, enjoy their individual experience when they're flourishing, because we know that's going to contribute to ours. Because if you're full on the inside, you're going to want to give to others. That's just the way that we're wired. And so the whole thing about equity is that if we innately have this understanding of what's fair and what that we want to contribute to the well-being of others, because that's how we contribute to our own, we don't need someone to tell us how to do it. We innately know how to do it. So anyone who starts writing down a set of rules of how that's done removes that voluntary cooperation that we are geared for. And that's what that Communist Manifesto does as well. It's very slowly but insidiously stripping away your natural capacity to use your intelligence to know how to be in the moment in any given time of your life. It takes that away, and it creates this idea that you need to outsource that someone knows better than you. That's not your responsibility. And that's how we get controlled, is when we outsource that divine responsibility that comes with the fact we have a conscience. So anyway, we'll continue on.
Now, collectivism is the group expression when you haven't understood that the group is a group of individuals. If you're understanding that the group is a group of individuals that have come together voluntarily, then you're an individualist. Working together voluntarily in a group. Fine. But what we're seeing increasingly is the collectivist idea, which is that you don't get to choose as an individual. We're going to decide that you are in this group and you are labelled like this. That's not voluntary. That's involving coercion. That's involving an external authority. Okay, and then that's going to lead us on to understanding about order following and things like that, which we'll come on to.
So I'm hoping that's making a bit more sense for you guys now.
Okay, so what are the other expressions of equity and inequity? So it's going to be things like fairness and justice on the left-hand side, and obviously the opposite of that on the right-hand side. You decide what is good for you. That's the individualist. Yeah, but the collectivist version of that is someone else decides what's good for you. These are the kinds of expressions that we're talking about. Yeah. As an individualist, you want freedom, but the individualist will want freedom for the collectivist as well. But the collectivist will not agree with that, and they want to control you. So, yeah. So you're wanting a fairness on both sides, but yeah. So you get freedoms if they grant it to you. Freedom of speech as an individualist, that the collectivist will say you can say what they allow you to say.
That was very important. You think about how we've been under this thing of political correctness for I don't know how long. That's it right there. It's laid it out for you, right? So if you don't have control over yourself, you are outsourcing it because you don't believe in your own authority, then that means that you have created a vacuum for an external authority. And that's all mind tricks. And that's how we've got down this road, guys. So if you all get this thing about, the child trafficking and, oh, look, Bosie's great because, he's the one who exposes it and stuff, he's never going to teach you the root cause of all that. And if you don't know the root cause, is that it all comes down to the individual outsourcing their authority, you're still going to think that someone can fix it for you. And that's the biggest trick on the planet. It's an old one, very, very well worked because it works every time because people think that they can't be fooled. That's the ego. Thinking it can't be fooled, it won't allow itself to accept it. And, the criminal cabal knows that, so they use it to their advantage. So the first thing, if you actually want to change, is to accept that you can be fooled, that you do have biases and prejudices, and that you are prone to want to, believe in them and actually have the comfort of them being true. If you can't own that, you're always going to be controlled, because then you're never going to be up to that position where you're going, oh, maybe I am needing to look into, maybe there is a bias here that I'm not really aware of, so let me look into that. If you're not open in that landscape, you are a slave. That's just sheer fact, and that's how you get controlled. And that's how all these people who follow these so-called heroes, they get controlled the same way, because they're not willing to look into themselves of how they are easy to manipulate, because that's too embarrassing for them, because they've got an inner educator that's telling them there's something defective about them, and so they refuse to look at it because that's the only way they learn to see it. And there's another mind trick for you there. So let's have a look at it again. It's got it right here for you. It tells you what the actual punishment is, like a person. What on earth is that even? We've all been down that road, right? What a person is, just a legal definition for a corporation, right? So they've treated you as a collective right there. You're in the collective. You're part of a person. A legal definition of a human, which is a monster. Yes, I know all that stuff, guys. I don't need to have that repeated to me over and over again. So the person, like this act. So it's just saying that you're going to get this penalty of imprisonment for 2 years, and that now, like, ooh, look at that, big mind trick. You don't get an employee setting their own terms and conditions of what's going to happen to them, and then they create an out clause for themselves. That's pretty much what people are voting for when they go and use the 1901.